So for this assignment, the podcast, I really wanted to talk about disrespect in the classroom, and I wanted to kind of focus in on a few specific aspects of it, and not just talk about the general how students are disrespectful, how it makes teachers feel, what to do about it, but more specifically, why and how are parents disrespectful to teachers? How is administration disrespectful to teachers, even if it's in an indirect way? And I really want to focus in on the whys of these issues. Like, why is this happening? Why has this been such an issue more now than in the past? And how people can overcome this, I guess. And the reason that I really was interested in this topic is actually because recently I've heard and seen a lot of teachers post on social media that I'm friends with about how it's not a teacher's job to teach students to be respectful. That this is something that students should be learning from their parents, and while yes, that should be reinforced at school through teachers, and not every child is going to be perfect. There are going to be days where they get a little disrespectful, a little irritated, but it's not solely on the teacher. That is something that should be taught at home and just reinforced at school. And then also the behaviors going on at school when a teacher disciplines the child or sends home a note or something, the parent should also reinforce that punishment at home as well. And I wanted to kind of focus in on what teachers actually think is disrespectful. So I was reading up on a case study, and it said that students misbehaving can range from talking when they're not supposed to, goofing off with peers, all the way to verbal insults, and that misconduct in the classroom is known to not only get worse over the time, but also lower students' academic scores as well. So it's not just for the teachers and their sanity, it's for the students as well. You want them to succeed in school, and as a teacher, it's really hard to watch students not perform to their best abilities because they're too busy goofing off, being disrespectful, feeling like they don't have to do things even though they should. So the first thing that I want to talk about is actually a personal story that I was told by the parents of the student. I was at the grandparents' house for dinner. They had their neighbors over, and they wanted to tell me this really funny story. And so I'm excited. I'm ready for a funny story. And they proceed to tell us how their son, who is in second grade, has not been talking at school. He refuses to talk to his teacher. And they couldn't really understand why. And then one day, grandparent came and visited them, and they were talking, and interacting like normal. And so they sat down with him, and they asked him, why do you not talk to your teacher? What, are you shy? Is something going on? And he replies, my teacher doesn't listen to me when I want to go outside, so why should I listen and talk to her? And they thought it was funny. And I guess at first you might think, oh wow, the kid's sassy, like so funny. But you should always respect your authority, and you should always, always, always do what you are told. In instances like this where you have a direct superior and it's quite obvious you should be following instructions. And I was honestly kind of appalled with how funny the parents thought this was. That they didn't think, hey, here's an issue of disrespect. My child is being disrespectful. This is a horrible life lesson to continue on throughout life. We need to tell him and teach him and show him that this is not okay. But instead, they just thought it was funny. And I think that kind of ties into my next point about some of the main reasons that parents are disrespectful to teachers and reassure children's behavior. And so parents reassure the behavior of their children, like in my example that I just give, because parents project their ego onto their children. These children are fancy sport cars that these parents created. They are their own blood. They are from them. So in these parents' heads, their children are perfect. And they don't want to acknowledge that something could be wrong, or if you're going back to the car reference, broken. Because they don't want their ego to be tarnished. They don't want to have to sit there and think, oh, wow, maybe as a parent, I should have done something different, or should have done something better, or do something in the future better. And while it's definitely not something to beat yourself down about, kids will be disrespectful, it's a learning curve that you have to teach them, it is really important as a parent to acknowledge that your child's not perfect. Just to put that out there, my mom has always told me, you're not perfect, I don't think you're perfect. If you get in trouble, it's your fault. And I think that that's kind of that mentality that's missing from modern day parenting. And that in the past, teachers were deemed highly educated and respected. They were the ones who knew things, and they were teaching everybody else. But now they're kind of looked on as like commonly educated, like there's nothing super special about them. And I think that just kind of knocked them down a little bit, is in terms of lack of respect. And then something that I thought was interesting when I read as to why parents disrespect teachers is that in the past 20-ish years, maybe, politicians, to kind of stand out from their opponents, have been thinking, hey, what's something that I can do, like that I can address, that I can tackle to grab voters' attentions? What makes me different from my opponent? And they started picking education, because that's important. Everybody is educated. Everybody wants the best education, not only for themselves, but their children, people that they love and care about. And so, as politicians are trying to create education policies and stuff, it takes people's distaste in politics and oh, well, that policy just sucks, like, the education that we have now must suck if we need this new policy. And so they're taking that and they're weeding that distaste into not only the educational system, but in turn those who choose to go into it and support it, which are teachers, administration, and clerical staff and people like that. I also thought it was interesting to note that that the teachers are considered scapegoats for blame on like elected officials, in this scenario where they're saying, oh, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to fix that. And when this politician doesn't come in and he doesn't do what he says, and the education system isn't changing, and students, they're learning, they're getting good grades, but they're doing it the same way as before the politician had promised, 9 times out of 10, that blame is going to deflect to the teachers, not the elected officials who claimed these things in the first place. Because then you have to go back to, with these elected officials, is there funding? Are there resources? How high on your priority list is this? Is this going to be the first thing you tackle? Or when other issues take longer, is this just going to keep getting pushed back and back until your turn's up and it doesn't happen? And I also think it's important to note that the parents who do have issues typically, with whether it's the education system or, a parent sends home a note saying, hey, your child just wasn't, wasn't really behaving as well as they should, or they're not performing as well as they should. These parents that usually lash out are the ones who are working hard, or it's a single parent trying to cope on their own. Parents that have to work 2 or more jobs to make ends meet. And I'm not saying that these are bad things, I'm just saying that this results in a tired parent to go from work to home, to have to clean, to cook, to take care of their children. And at the end of the day, they have all this anger, tired, stress, and they don't really get that relaxing patience throughout their day. And so at the end of the day, after all of that, the last thing that they want to do is look at their child and think, wow, you need to not be disrespectful, or you need to study, because they don't necessarily have the time or the resources to help them study, or get them a tutor, or tell them, hey, like, this behavior is not acceptable, let's sit down and let's talk about it. And not only that, but at home, to consistently discipline their child when they do something wrong, because that's hard and it takes time and effort. And so I think it's important from a teacher standpoint to look out for those students and maybe not necessarily cut them more slack, but kind of pour into their cup a little more. Because when they're not getting that fulfilled gratification at home, they will react in public, at school, with their classmates, and punishing them for their bad behavior is not going to cause them to want to change. And then another point that I researched that I thought was interesting was administration, and how sometimes they cannot be so respectful to teachers or support teachers. And it was kind of hard to find information on this at first, just because a lot of it was about how administration supports teachers, like how can they. And so I took an article and I pulled some points out of it that kind of were like, oh wow, well this is something that I could definitely see an administrator doing. And so the first thing that I wanted to mention is that teachers hardly ever leave work at school. When they come home, they grade papers, they lesson plan, they cut out activities, print, laminate. Lots of teachers have laminators at their home, like the little travel ones, which is expensive. Not only the fact that they're working outside of home, they always have stacks of papers. And so it's always important that when a teacher gets home, since they already have all this to do, that they also get time to relax, to not have to worry about, anything else if they've chosen to move their work all in school or to one day, or even just to get their short little to-do list done that they have after school and then be done. And so administration, sending them emails, to-do lists, or communicating with them outside of school hours can just be such an overbearing thing. And I just think that's an example of administration not supporting their teachers. And I also think that's something important that I kind of thought was ironic, or not ironic, but just kind of like, I was just kind of baffled by this, because you're in a professional environment, and obviously this administration is your boss, but the teachers are professionals as well, and you should look at each other with respect both ways. And so I found it interesting that a lot of times administration, when teachers are, not really motivated or had a bad day, administration can just look at them and say, you're here for the kids. And while that's true, teachers know that. They wouldn't be there if they didn't care about the kids. What they're looking for is some support, some motivation on their end. Like, hey, you can do it. What do you need? Like, can I make these copies for you? Which I've had administrators come into my classrooms when I was in high school and middle school, and I remember them doing this, and I thought that was really nice of them. And one of the articles mentioned that in a meeting, when a teacher doesn't really understand a new policy going into effect at school, and they question it, not because they disagree, but because they just want a reasoning as to why, that administration uses it's for the kids as an equivalent to because I said so. And I'm a firm believer in whatever you're going to do, you need a reason why. And if your reasoning isn't strong enough to share with people, then I don't think that reasoning is good enough. And so I just find that almost appalling. I don't think I'd be able to handle that as a teacher. I mean, obviously I would, but it would just be one of those things that I'd probably have to bite my tongue a little just to not say anything, because I just think that's kind of rude. Those teachers are the ones having to put this policy in place daily, and I think that they should be respected enough to have an answer as to why. And I think this kind of lies into that principals want teachers to be leaders in their school, and want to give them, some of the work and branch out and run with ideas, but they don't trust and value teachers as professional educators. And they want to encourage this teacher leadership, but they don't trust the teachers enough to step back, which causes micromanagement, and teachers never thrive under the magnifying glass, one of the articles said, which I just thought was a great point. And then another thing that kind of goes like opposite of this, is these administrators coming in and asking, what can I do for you? Administrators sometimes come in and say, can you do this one more thing for me? And I understand that administrators have a lot on their plate, and I'm not saying that should never happen, but I think administrators should really sit back and think, hey, I know my desk is kind of full, but this teacher's desk is full as well. And they've had to handle 30 kids for however long the school year has been going on. Is this something that can wait? Is this something that, I can talk to them about? We can figure it out together. Just kind of like that overall sense of respecting that they're not the only busy ones, that these teachers are busy as well. Overall, I think that disrespect in the classroom has risen over the years, and instead of looking at what is deemed as disrespectful, how teachers are disciplining the students, which is important, but we should kind of look at where this respect is fostering, and I think it's fostering in homes and where parents aren't disciplining their kids, or if it's that they're too busy because they have so much work that, and too many kids, it's so stressful, I can't even imagine, and finding new and creative ways to intervene, because you don't want to put it all on those parents. Obviously they're so stressed they can't do it on their own, but it's also not for the teachers, and then that's where administration stepping in and being kind of disrespectful and not like valuing that teachers are hard workers on their own. They don't need more things stacked on their plate, can really just cause one overwhelmed teacher who cannot deal with disrespect in the classroom because they are so overwhelmed. But overall I really enjoyed researching this topic and talking about it. It's definitely something that I am very passionate about.